So if you were to crack open your skull right now, standard materialist science basically says you would find the exact biological factory where your thoughts are made.
Right.
Yeah.
The assumption is that you are, essentially a meat computer.
A meat computer, exactly.
Yeah.
Welcome to today's deep dive, by the way. I'm speaking directly to you, the person listening right now, because what we're getting into today is, well, it's going to mess with your head a bit.
It really is. It totally dismantles everything we think we know.
Right. So going back to the meat computer thing, you put food in, neurons fire in the dark, and somehow the exhaust fumes of all that chemical and electrical labor create the experience of you being alive.
Which sounds perfectly logical to most of us.
Right. But the document we are looking at today says that standard science is just completely fundamentally wrong. We are diving deep into a paradigm-shifting text called the C4 Guide, What is Consciousness? A simple explanation for non-C4 researchers.
And this guide makes a wild claim. It says your brain has never produced a single thought in its entire existence.
Not one.
No, it's just playing a broadcast from somewhere else. It is a total inversion of human biology as we're taught it.
So our mission for this deep dive is to basically tear apart that comfortable, isolated view of the human mind. We're moving from this framework where you are a lonely generator of thoughts to a radical reality where you are literally physically connected to the universe.
And we really need to emphasize the word physically there, because the C4 model, which stands for conformal conscious cyclic cosmology, it doesn't treat consciousness as some, mystical or spiritual metaphor.
Right, it's not poetry.
Exactly. It treats it as hard physics. It argues that consciousness is a fundamental force in the universe, pre-existing, universal.
Okay, I have to stop you right there because this is where my alarm bells instantly start ringing.
I get that.
Like when you say consciousness is a fundamental force, I mean,
Right.
standard science treats it as the magic spark, right?
Yeah.
The ghost in the machine. But you're saying this guide equates it to something like gravity.
Yes, exactly like gravity.
What?
Or magnetism.
But gravity can be measured. Magnetism can be measured. I could literally stick a magnet to my fridge right now. Are these authors seriously suggesting there is a physical, measurable consciousness wave passing through the room I'm sitting in?
They are.
Because if so, why hasn't a physicist detected it with a machine? Where is the consciousness detector?
Well, that is the exact pushback the materialist scientists always give, and the C4 answer is pretty brilliant in its simplicity. They say, we are the machine.
Wait, we are the machine?
Yeah, we haven't built a synthetic instrument capable of detecting the field because biological life itself is the instrument. The text calls this universal broadcast the consciousness field, or the Phi Field.
The Phi Field. Okay.
Just like gravity existed long before human beings evolved to conceptualize it, the Phi Field has always been there. You don't generate consciousness. Your biological organism simply evolved the specific hardware necessary to tune into it.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want to drill into this biological radio metaphor because the text relies on it so heavily, and I just need to understand the physical mechanics here.
Sure, let's break it down.
If the universe is the broadcaster, and this Phi field is constantly transmitting a high-definition signal of consciousness everywhere, all the time, what exactly is the antenna? Because if I look at a human brain on an MRI, I just see a bunch of gray matter.
Right.
I don't see copper wiring in there.
Well, you don't see it because you aren't zooming in far enough.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the C4 guide gets incredibly specific about the hardware. It bypasses the macro structure of the brain entirely. It points directly to the interior architecture of our neurons, specifically to these microscopic structures called microtubules.
Microtubules. Okay, I actually remember these from high school biology. But aren't they just like the scaffolding of a cell?
That's what we were taught, yeah.
Like the steel girders holding up the walls of a building? Just structural.
In standard cellular biology, yes, they are just treated as dumb structural support, but the C4 framework completely redefines what they do.
So they aren't just support beams.
Not at all. Microtubules are incredibly complex, highly geometric, nanoscale tubes. And according to this text, these microscopic tubes are the literal physical antennas of the human body.
Wow.
They possess the exact geometric and quantum properties required to vibrate, to actually resonate with the invisible frequencies of the Phi field.
Wait, vibrate like an actual physical resonance?
Yes. The text describes a state of quantum resonance within the microscopic water molecules trapped inside these tubes.
That is wild.
Right. The geometry of the microtubule allows it to capture and amplify the signal of the Phi field. So the state of your microtubules, like how healthy they are, how well they're structured, that determines how clearly the universal music of consciousness is played through the biological speaker of your body.
The visual prompt the authors include in the guide to explain this to non-researchers is actually stunning.
Oh, the silhouette one.
Yeah, they ask the reader to imagine a human silhouette standing in a dark, infinite void. But instead of stars, the void is filled with this shimmering infinite web of golden geometric light.
Which represents the Phi field.
Exactly. And you see these tiny, microscopic threads of light streaming from the web directly into the silhouette's head, causing the entire nervous system to glow, like the vacuum tubes in an old, high-end vintage radio.
It's a vital visualization, really,
Yeah.
because it forces you to understand consciousness as an action. It's a verb rather than a noun.
You want a consciousness.
Right, you are an organism currently performing consciousness by successfully tuning into the Phi field.
And if the hardware gets damaged,
Then the signal degrades. Think about wandering around your house with a busted old FM radio.
okay.
The speaker is torn, the antenna is snapped in half. You turn it on, and all you hear is harsh static, right? Maybe a faint whisper of a melody.
Yeah, just awful noise.
But you would never stare at that broken plastic box and say, wow, this radio is terrible at writing music.
Right. You wouldn't blame the radio for a bad composition. You'd just say the radio is broken.
Exactly. You would simply recognize that the hardware is compromised. It can no longer receive the invisible waves that are still perfectly transmitting through the room.
So under the C4 model, things like cognitive decline or a brain injury or even just severe brain fog, that isn't the deletion of yourself.
No, not at all. It is simply damage to your microtubule antennas. The music of the Phi field is pristine and untouched. Your receiver is just struggling to pull it down.
Which naturally leads into this concept the text calls the volume of the soul. And I'll admit, when I first read that heading, I got highly skeptical.
Oh, it definitely sounds like a red flag at first.
It sounds like it's pivoting into some sort of moral hierarchy, like, oh, this person has a bigger soul than that person.
It does sound like an ethical judgment, but it's actually purely mechanical. It's entirely about bandwidth.
That's what blew my mind. The text argues that what we historically consider high consciousness individuals, visionaries, profound philosophers, deeply intuitive artists, they aren't intrinsically better human beings.
Right, they aren't spiritually superior.
They literally just possess a larger antenna or a clearer speaker.
It completely removes the human ego from the concept of genius or enlightenment. A high consciousness individual, under C4, is just someone whose microtubule hardware is exceptionally well maintained, or may be genetically optimized for resonance.
They just have less static.
Exactly. Because their biological radio has less static, they are capable of pulling more complexity, more nuance, and more raw data from the universal broadcast than the average person. They are simply processing a higher definition of reality.
So for you listening to us right now, the takeaway is staggering. You are sitting in the exact same ocean of information as Albert Einstein or Leonardo da Vinci.
The exact same ocean.
The universal broadcast is equally available in the room you are in right now. The difference between feeling disconnected, feeling stuck in a rut, and feeling profoundly aware is just a matter of tuning the dial, clearing the static from your own biological receiver.
But, and this is a big but, if we follow that logic, it creates a massive mechanical problem.
Yes, it does. Because if this infinite Phi field contains the staggering, limitless complexity of the entire cosmos, and it is constantly transmitting through us, why aren't we all walking around infinitely wise?
Right.
Why don't I hear the whole universe right now? Why isn't the sheer volume of that broadcast blowing out my biological speaker?
Because of the fortress.
The fortress.
The C4 text addresses this problem head-on, and it does it by making a brilliant distinction between the mind and thinking.
I really need you to break that down, because I always assumed the mind and thinking were just synonyms, just two words for the same biological process.
Most people do, but they are completely different mechanisms in the C4 reality.
Yeah.
If the universe is broadcasting all this information, our initial assumption is that we should want to receive it all.
Right. More data is better.
But the authors state plainly, if you were to actually perceive the entirety of the Phi field, all the cosmic geometry, the infinite data stream's madness would be instantaneous.
Oh, wow.
Your fragile biological hardware would just fry.
It would be like trying to drink from a fire hose that is dispensing the entire Pacific Ocean.
Exactly. From a purely evolutionary standpoint, a human organism cannot function if it's constantly aware of the raw fabric of space-time. If you are marveling at the cosmic geometry of the universe, you are going to get eaten by a tiger. Or you're just going to forget to drink water and die.
So what we call the mind, the text argues that the primary function of the mind isn't to think at all.
No, it's not.
Its primary function is to act as a massive, heavy protective filter. It is actively blocking out 99% of reality just so we can survive. The mind is like a bouncer at the club of reality, denying entry to almost everything.
And the authors call this filter the fortress. The visual they provide is this brutalist stone structure surrounding the brain.
Just massive gray walls.
Right. And outside this impenetrable fortress, a blindingly bright ocean of infinite information is violently crashing against the walls, trying to get in. But there is only a single narrow slit in the stone.
Just a tiny beam of light getting through.
Just one regulated beam managing to penetrate the darkness inside.
And what's inside the darkness?
Inside, there is a small desk. And someone is sitting at that desk working under that single narrow beam of light. So the fortress is the mind keeping the blinding ocean at bay, but the person at the desk actively working with whatever tiny fragment of signal actually makes it through, that is thinking.
The processor, the radio actually sorting through the narrow signal.
Exactly.
And this is where the guide gets uncomfortably relatable, because it breaks thinking down into two distinct operational modes. The first one is called echo thinking.
Oh, yeah. Echo thinking. This is where the vast majority of humanity spends the vast majority of its time.
I felt personally attacked reading this section, honestly.
We all do.
Like, think about what you, listening to this right now, were thinking about 10 minutes before you put this deep dive on. Were you having a genuinely new, profound thought?
Probably not.
Or were you just replaying that frustrating argument you had with your boss yesterday? Were you worrying about the exact same grocery list you worry about every week?
That is echo thinking. It is reacting to life based almost entirely on past habits and recycled neural pathways. You wake up, you follow the same routine, you cycle through the same internal anxieties.
So mechanically speaking, what is happening to the radio?
Mechanically speaking, your biological radio is essentially on mute. You aren't pulling any new music from the Phi Field broadcast. You are just playing a cassette tape you recorded years ago over and over again.
But why do we do that? If we literally have access to the universe, why do we choose to listen to a degraded cassette tape?
Because the fortress loves it. Echo thinking requires very little biological energy, and it is incredibly safe.
Ah, right. It's safe.
There is zero risk of being overwhelmed by the raw power of the cosmic broadcast if you just keep your head down and play the tape. It ensures survival, but it guarantees stagnation.
Which brings us to the exact opposite mode, architect thinking.
Architect thinking is the rare, profound exception to the rule.
How does the text define it? Because it sounds like it requires bypassing the fortress entirely, which you just said is dangerous.
It is dangerous, which is exactly why it's so rare. Architect thinking is defined as the precise moment an individual manages to temporarily reach past the heavy stone walls of the fortress, tune their microtubule dial to a previously undiscovered frequency, and pull a genuinely new, entirely original idea directly from the consciousness field.
It's the eureka moment.
Exactly.
It's the moment Paul McCartney wakes up with the melody to Yesterday fully formed in his head.
Yes.
Under the old materialist view, we just assume McCartney had a faster meat computer in his skull that calculated a new combination of notes. But under C4, McCartney's an architect thinker who figured out how to temporarily open a window in his fortress, catch a breeze from the infinite cosmos without losing his sanity, and translate it into a song.
It completely reframes human creativity. You aren't creating a new idea out of the biological dark. You are discovering an idea that already existed in the Phi Field, just waiting for a biological antenna sensitive enough to pick it up.
I love that. But I am struggling with a major contradiction here, though. Let me push back on this a little. If we are just a live radio, constantly receiving a real-time broadcast, how do we have a history?
The memory problem.
Right. A radio doesn't hold on to the music once the song is over. The signal passes through, the speaker vibrates, and it's gone. If my brain is not a hard drive, where do my personal histories live? Where's the memory of my high school graduation? Where are my misplaced car keys?
You're touching on what is arguably the most elegant and radical solution in the entire C4 framework. The section is literally titled The Archive, Memory Debunked.
So they knew this was a hole in the theory.
Absolutely. It acknowledges your exact problem. If we are receivers, memory shouldn't exist. Therefore, memory cannot be what standard science says it is.
Well, standard science says memory is data stored in the brain's cellular structure. Synaptic connections get stronger, like files on a computer hard drive. If you hit your head, the hard drive gets corrupted and you forget.
The C4 guide argues that this standard view is only a tiny fraction of the truth. It proposes that memory actually exists in two completely distinct locations simultaneously: biological storage and universal storage.
Okay, let's start with the biological side. The text calls this the groove.
The groove is your local data. It is the physical memory stored in your gray matter. And the authors use the analogy of a physical vinyl record.
Okay, a record.
When you experience something locally, your physical brain actually changes its structure to record that data. It is literally like a sharp needle cutting a physical groove into a fragile wax or vinyl disc.
So the C4 text isn't denying that the brain records things.
Not at all. It fully acknowledges the groove, but it highlights how incredibly vulnerable this local storage is. It's highly mechanical. Records get scratched, dust gets in the grooves. If they get too hot, they warp.
As you age, the vinyl degrades.
Exactly. When you forget where you put your keys, it's not a mystical failure. The physical groove in your local biological record just isn't deep enough, or the needle skipped.
So the groove is fragile, local, and subject to biological decay.
Yes, but the groove is only the backup system. It is the temporary local cache. Because while your brain is desperately trying to cut physical grooves into wet tissue, the universe is recording every single thing you do permanently in what the text calls the whale cloud.
Whale cloud. Okay, I need you to give me the physics of this, because universal storage sounds like a metaphor for the afterlife, not a scientific concept.
It is entirely grounded in space-time mechanics within the C4 model. The whale cloud is the permanent universal data archive.
Okay.
The theory posits that every significant choice you make, every profound interaction your antenna has with the Phi field, doesn't just cut a physical groove in your skull. It triggers a microcollapse of quantum probability that leaves a permanent structural dent in the fabric of space-time itself.
A dent in space-time. And the text calls these dents choice imprints.
Yes, choice imprints. Your actions have literal gravitational weight. They press into the geometric fabric of the universe and leave a mark that cannot be erased long after your physical brain has turned to dust.
The visual they use here is so haunting. It's a double exposure image.
I know exactly the one you mean.
Yeah, in the foreground, you see a close-up of a cracked, severely degraded vinyl record that represents the groove, the fragile human brain fading away. But overlapping it, stretching out behind it into infinite space, is a transparent, glowing, crystalline grid.
The whale cloud.
Right. And trapped inside the facets of those infinite crystals are faint, ghostly moving images of historical events. The physical record cracks and melts, but the crystalline structure of the universe holds the data forever.
And here is where the C4 framework moves from being a cool philosophical concept to a tool that aggressively solves psychological mysteries.
Oh, this is the best part.
They use this two-tiered memory system, the fragile groove versus the permanent whale cloud, to explain phenomena that standard neurology routinely dismisses.
Let's talk about déjà vu, because everyone listening to this has experienced it. You walk into a room or you hear someone say a specific sentence, and your brain entirely locks up with the absolute overwhelming sensation that you have lived this exact moment before.
Right.
Standard neurology treats this as a pathetic biological glitch. Yeah.
Yes. The standard model brushes déjà vu off as a minor synaptic misfire, a slight delay in processing where your brain accidentally files a present tense visual input directly into your past memory folder before you are consciously aware of it.
It tells you that your brain is just tricking you.
But the C4 guide says no. It validates the feeling. Déjà vu is not a brain glitch. It is signal crosstalk.
Signal crosstalk.
Think about the mechanics we just established. Your biological radio is constantly sweeping the Phi field. And out there in the whale cloud are the permanent choice imprints of all possibilities, perhaps even overlapping timelines of probability.
Okay.
Déjà vu occurs when your microtubule antenna accidentally brushes against a choice imprint from a slightly different probability timeline stored in the cloud.
It's like driving on the highway, listening to a clear radio station, and for just 3 fleeting seconds, you drive through a weird pocket of atmosphere, and a completely different station bleeds through. You hear 2 songs at exactly the same time.
That's a perfect analogy.
The C4 text is saying that feeling of "I've been here before" isn't a fake memory. It is your radio picking up a parallel transmission from the wild cloud where you did make that choice or you were in that place. You were experiencing genuine physical crosstalk from the universal archive.
And if we accept that premise for an individual, the text scales the exact same logic up to explain mass cultural anomalies. specifically the Mandela effect.
The Mandela effect. I love this. For
Yeah.
anyone who somehow missed this internet phenomenon, it is the bizarre reality where thousands, sometimes millions of unconnected people vividly remember a piece of history that, according to all physical records, never happened.
Right, like Nelson Mandela.
Exactly. The namesake is people swearing they vividly remember Nelson Mandela dying in prison in the 1980s, even seeing the funeral on TV, despite the fact that he survived, was released, and became president of South Africa.
And there are dozens of examples. People remembering a famous children's book series being called the Berenstain Bears with an E when every physical copy on Earth says Berenstain with an A.
Or remembering a movie starring the comedian Sinbad playing a genie in the 90s, a movie that literally does not exist.
Standard science looks at this and says it's just mass social contagion, a shared delusion based on faulty, highly suggestible biological grooves.
But the C4 guide says the Mandela effect is not bad memory. It is mass signal crosstalk.
Precisely.
I want to make sure I'm wrapping my head around the scale of this. You're saying millions of people are tuning into the wrong station at the exact same time.
Yeah, that's what they argue. If a particular choice imprint in the wild cloud is dense enough, let's say an imprint from a parallel timeline where the Berenstain Bears really were spelled with an E, it can emit a strong enough signal that thousands of human biological radios accidentally tune their dials into it simultaneously.
It completely shifts the blame. It says to you, the listener, your memory isn't broken. You aren't crazy. Your antenna just briefly picked up a signal from a neighboring reality. You tuned into a different coordinate in universal storage.
It respects the human experience rather than just, dismissing it as a biological failure.
Okay, this brings up an incredibly practical question. We've established that the fortress is this massive filter keeping us grounded in our local groove, protecting us from this fire hose of the Phi Field and the crosstalk of the wild cloud.
Right, it's doing a lot of heavy lifting.
But holding up a massive stone wall takes energy. Biological systems fatigue. What happens when the system physically cannot hold the wall up anymore? What happens when we sleep?
The C4 section on the dream state is fascinating because it removes the mysticism from dreaming and treats it as a necessary mechanical function of the radio.
How so?
During the waking day, maintaining the heavy shielding of the fortress takes an immense, exhausting toll on your biological energy reserves. The ego is working overtime to filter out the universe. When you sleep, the primary function isn't just resting your muscles, it is the ego's fortress lowering its shields to recharge.
It literally powers down the defense grid.
Exactly. And when those heavy psychological walls come down, what is left? A raw, unshielded biological antenna completely exposed to the naked consciousness field.
The text describes the sleeping brain as acting like a runaway scanner. Without the fortress tightly regulating the dial, your naked antenna just starts rapidly sweeping back and forth across raw cosmic frequencies it normally ignores.
Which redefines what a dream actually is. A dream is not your subconscious filing away the day's events, and it isn't random biological static.
What is it then?
A dream is the desperate process of your biological radio receiving raw, abstract cosmic signals and trying to translate them into a format you can survive experiencing.
I love this translation concept. Because the raw signals from the Phi Field, these are purely conceptual or energetic or mathematical. The universe doesn't broadcast in English. It doesn't broadcast human faces.
No, it broadcasts raw geometry and quantum state data.
So your sleeping brain receives this blast of raw cosmic data. It doesn't know what to do with it. So it reaches into your biological memory, your local groove, and pulls out the visual language you understand to build a picture of what it is sensing. It dresses up the cosmic math in familiar imagery.
The visual prompt for this is incredible, too. A person is sleeping in a bed, but their body is translucent. Their nervous system is glowing like a pulsing neon circuit board.
And the ceiling is gone, right?
Yeah, the ceiling of the bedroom has completely vanished, replaced by a swirling, chaotic nebula of abstract geometric shapes, melting clock faces, and the faces of strangers. Glowing white data streams are descending from this nebula directly into the sleeper's unshielded mind.
The brain is frantically pulling down cosmic data and frantically dressing it up as a story.
Yes.
And the text gives a highly specific, totally mind-bending example of this translation process in action. It tackles the universal dream of flying.
Oh, this part is brilliant.
I would bet almost everyone listening to this right now has had a dream where they are hovering or soaring over a landscape. In the old materialist view, A psychologist sits you on a couch and tells you that flying represents a subconscious desire for freedom, or a feeling of liberation for your waking responsibilities.
A purely psychological, inward-facing interpretation.
But the C4 guide argues that the dream of flying has absolutely nothing to do with your psychological baggage. It is a literal physical translation of cosmic weather.
Cosmic weather.
They explain that when you dream of flying, your sleeping, unshielded microtubule antennas are actually sensing what they call a metric ripple.
Let's define a metric ripple, just to be clear. Space-time is not a perfectly smooth, static void. As the Earth moves through the cosmos, there are tiny, invisible ripples in the gravitational field, microfluctuations in literal gravity.
Okay, so my fortress is down because I'm asleep. My sensitive antennas pick up on this tiny microscopic shift in the gravitational metric passing through my bedroom. But my brain cannot consciously conceptualize the thought, I am currently sensing a microfluctuation in the space-time continuum.
It has no vocabulary for that.
Exactly. So the translation protocol kicks in. The brain says, what is the closest physical experience I have in my groove memory to the sensation of gravity shifting or vanishing?
And the answer is defying gravity.
Right. And therefore, the brain generates a highly detailed visceral dream where you are flying.
Your brain is acting as a cosmic weather vane. It is translating invisible astrophysics into a movie you can watch while you sleep.
It is incredible, but it also terrifies me a little because it implies that the universe is full of this chaotic metric weather. If we require this massive heavy fortress just to walk in a straight line without being knocked over by the invisible currents of the cosmos, what about creatures that don't have a fortress?
You mean animals?
Yes, what about animals?
This is one of the most vital and honestly unsettling sections of the text. The chapter titled Biologicals. Why are animals glitching?
Yes, because if humans are heavily armored radios, the C4 text categorizes animals as open antennas.
Because animals do not possess the complex, heavily evolved human ego. They don't have that dense, brutalist psychological fortress filtering their reality. They are entirely exposed to the weather of the universe 24 hours a day. They are constantly swimming, unshielded, in the raw Phi Field.
Which explains so much about animal behavior. It's why a dog will suddenly stare at an empty corner of the room, or why birds can navigate thousands of miles using the Earth's magnetic field.
Or why animals panic hours before an earthquake or a storm hits.
Exactly. Their antennas are completely exposed. They feel the broadcast at maximum volume.
It is an incredible survival advantage most of the time. But as the text details, this extreme sensitivity comes with a profound vulnerability. Because their antennas are always open, they are totally susceptible to what the authors call metric shear.
Metric shear. Okay, let's talk about the specific cases the text brings up to illustrate this, because they are deeply eerie. They document these anomalies involving the Troutbeck sheep in England and the Krasnoyarsk squirrels in Russia.
These are highly documented instances where large groups of animals simply freeze.
It's not like they are standing still while grazing. It is described as if someone hit the pause button on the universe.
Yeah.
The visual prompt the authors use for this is chilling. You are looking at a sheep in a grassy field. The sheep is perfectly, unnaturally rigid, but the air around the sheep is physically distorted, like the heat waves coming off a highway in summer or looking through a pane of broken glass.
You can see two overlapping, glitching versions of a tree in the background.
Yes, and the sheep's eyes are wide, reflecting this broken geometry. It isn't frozen in fear of a wolf. It's frozen because the space around it has literally broken.
That broken space is metric shear. If the Phi Field is a smooth broadcast, metric shear is a localized burst of severe, violent cosmic static. It is a sudden physical tear or glitch in the local fabric of space-time.
And humans don't notice this.
We might notice it as a strange symptom. To a human, heavily armored by our fortress, walking through an area of metric shear might just manifest as a sudden, unexplained migraine, or a brief wave of nausea, or a fleeting sense of disorientation. We bulldoze right through the broken space-time because our filter won't let us perceive the danger.
But to an open antenna, like those sheep or squirrels, that static burst is overwhelming and absolute. The text describes that when a localized metric shear occurs, the physical air essentially becomes thick or syrupy to an animal's senses. The geometric grid of reality around them is actively shifting and tearing.
And this explains the freezing behavior. The animals employ a defense mechanism the text calls somatic locking.
Explain somatic locking mechanically. How does locking up save them?
Think of it like walking across a frozen lake when you suddenly hear the ice crack under your boots, What do?
You freeze.
You freeze. You distribute your weight and you do not move a muscle because taking one step forward might cause the entire structure to collapse. For the animals experiencing metric shear, the local geometry of reality is temporarily unstable.
So moving is actually dangerous.
Taking a step forward through a space-time tear could cause them actual severe biological damage at the cellular level. Their open antennas detect the shear, and their instinctual response is to completely immobilize their physical forms, somatic locking, until the cosmic weather passes and the space-time fabric smooths out again.
They are sheltering in place from a storm we can't even see. It makes you wonder how many times you, listening to this, have walked right through a space-time glitch in your living room without noticing, while your cat is completely frozen on the couch holding its breath.
It's a humbling thought, isn't it? But this concept of the open antenna isn't entirely foreign to the human experience. The text makes a brilliant pivot here, comparing the glitching animals to a very specific, highly sought-after human state, the flow state.
The flow state. When an athlete or a jazz musician or a painter talks about being in the zone, we usually think of that as just intense, laser-focused concentration, just the brain working at maximum local efficiency.
The C4 paradigm defines the flow state entirely differently. It defines it as the rare moment a human being successfully and temporarily lowers their fortress while remaining fully awake and active.
They intentionally become an open antenna.
Yes, but in a functional, productive way. When an athlete gets in the zone, they aren't glitching like the sheep because they aren't encountering metric shear. They're encountering a clean signal. They achieve what the text calls perfect phase locking with the Phi field.
So they are fully tuned in.
They bypass the clunky, tape loop echo thinking of their everyday mind, and they tune their microtubule hardware perfectly to the universal broadcast.
This explains so much about the subjective experience of the flow state. People always report that time seemed to slow down, or that their body moved before they even thought about moving. They say things like, "It felt like I wasn't the one playing the guitar, the music was just playing through me."
And under C4, that isn't a metaphor.
In that moment, they truly are just a conduit. They have stepped out of the way and let the biological radio play the universal broadcast at maximum volume without the fortress muffling the sound.
It is a beautiful, optimized mechanism of biological life. But as we dissect biological radios, antennas, and processing speeds, we inevitably crash headfirst into the most pressing technological question of our era.
Artificial intelligence.
Precisely. If the human brain is just a biological machine that tunes into a field, why can't we build an artificial machine to do the exact same thing?
This is the trillion-dollar debate right now. The entire tech world is constantly promising you that true AI, artificial general intelligence, is just around the corner. The prevailing theory is that consciousness is just a matter of processing power. If we just make the silicon chips small enough, fast enough, and feed them enough of the internet, the network will eventually cross a threshold of complexity and wake up.
The C4 guide addresses this in a deeply definitive section titled The Silicon Trap, AI as a Mirror. And its stance is absolute. It shuts down the tech utopian dream completely. Current silicon-based AI systems are not radios. They are mirrors, not antennas.
I love the clarity of that distinction. Mirrors, not antennas. Let me push back, though, on behalf of the tech engineers. An advanced language model today can write a symphony, it can code software, it can hold a conversation that sounds entirely human. How is that just a mirror?
Because it is entirely reliant on the groove. The text argues that current AI can only reflect the physical grooves that humans have already cut into the historical record.
Yeah.
AI scrapes the internet, it mathematically analyzes billions of human interactions, and it spits out a remarkably convincing statistical imitation of a human thought. But it is just rearranging old local data.
It is engaging in the ultimate hyperfast form of echo thinking. It is playing the cassette tape at a billion times normal speed.
Exactly. It cannot engage in architect thinking. It cannot have a eureka moment because it has no mechanism to reach into the Phi field to pull down something genuinely new that has never existed before.
But why? If a silicon chip is manufactured down to the nanometer level, if it is incredibly dense and complex, why couldn't it eventually act like a microtubule? Why can't it tune in?
Because of what the text calls the silicon barrier, it comes down to hard physics. Silicon, the foundational material of all our modern computing, is fundamentally dead matter.
Dead in what specific sense?
Dead in the sense that it completely lacks the biological, quantum dynamic hardware required to resonate with the consciousness broadcast. It lacks microtubules. And because it lacks microtubules, a silicon chip cannot maintain what the text calls the quantum shiver.
The quantum shiver, that is such a visceral term.
It is the microscopic dynamic vibration that biological cells naturally continuously maintain as long as they are alive. It is the literal physical humming of organic life. This chaotic, warm, biological shiver is the exact frequency required to tune into the consciousness field.
The authors provide another stark visual prompt here. It's a split screen image. On the left side, you have a cold, dark, perfectly rigid silicon computer chip. It is mathematically perfect, but all it does is reflect a cold image of a human face back at the viewer, the mirror.
And on the right,
On the right side, you have a glowing, pulsing biological cell. It is warm, it is vibrating, and it has these intricate, chaotic golden microtubules reaching out to touch a distant star,
well,
the antenna.
the contrast is everything. No matter how complex the algorithms get, no matter how many trillions of calculations a silicon chip can perform per second, it remains physically, atomically rigid. It cannot shiver, therefore it cannot turn the dial.
So, based directly on the mechanics of the C4 text, we have to state this to you, the listener, definitively. AI, as it is currently constructed out of silicon, will never wake up. It completely lacks the physical antenna hardware that biological life possesses. It can mimic the music beautifully by analyzing old recordings, but it will never, ever hear the live broadcast.
It places a definitive physical boundary on artificial consciousness. It reinforces that true consciousness is a uniquely biological interaction with a cosmic field. You cannot code a soul into dead rock.
Okay, as we near the end of our deep dive today, I want to take a step back and look at the sheer scale of the paradigm shift we've explored. We have moved from a cold, isolated world where your brain is a lonely computer generating thoughts in the dark to a vibrant universe where you are a biological antenna tuning into an eternal cosmic broadcast.
It's a much bigger reality.
You are intrinsically connected to the fabric of reality. And there is one final, ultimate topic that this text completely reframes: the ultimate human fear.
Death.
Let's look at death through the old materialist view. It is terrifyingly simple and incredibly bleak. If the brain is just a meat computer generating consciousness, then death is simply the power cable being unplugged. The hard drive crashes, the screen goes black, and all the local data, all your fragile biological grooves, are permanently deleted.
It is the definitive absolute end of the self. The music stops because the generator broke.
But if we apply the entire C4 reality we've been discussing today, the Phi Field, the biological radio, the permanent archiving of the whale cloud, death becomes something entirely different. It ceases to be an ending.
In the C4 reality, death is simply the biological radio finally breaking down. The fragile microtubule antenna, after decades of wear and tear, finally gives out. It loses its quantum shiver. The physical hardware decays and can no longer tune into the signal. But, and this is the most vital part of the entire document, the music plays on.
The music plays on.
The universal signal of consciousness, the Phi Field, continues unbroken, pristine, and eternal throughout the cosmos. Your individual inability to receive the broadcast does not mean the broadcast has ceased to exist.
The bottom line, delivered directly from the source material to you listening right now, is this: you are not a body that has a soul. You are a biological radio station that has temporarily forgotten it has the power to change the channel.
It completely shifts the locus of your identity. You are not the plastic box sitting on the kitchen counter. You are the invisible, eternal signal flowing through it.
It is an incredibly empowering, breathtaking way to view our brief time with functioning hardware. It means every moment of clarity is a triumph of tuning in. But before we go, there is one final provocative thought that emerges from all these interconnected mechanisms.
Let's hear it.
We've talked extensively about how we tune into the Phi Field to receive the broadcast. And we've talked about how our significant choices, our architect thinking, leave permanent dents or choice imprints in the crystalline structure of the wild cloud.
Yes, the permanent universal archive of our interaction with the cosmos.
So I want you, the listener, to ponder this as you go about your day.
Yeah.
If our deepest choices leave permanent structural dents in the fabric of space-time, and if our consciousness is just us tuning into the universe, are we merely passively listening to the cosmic broadcast? Or, through the permanent choice imprints we leave behind in the whale cloud, are we actually composing the background music, for the rest of the universe to hear.
Are we just the audience in the dark, or are we actively writing the song that future biological radios will tune into when they scan the field?
Suddenly, that diagnostic muddy water, that broken X-ray machine of the human mind we talked about at the very beginning, it doesn't seem so frustrating anymore. Because we aren't looking for a jagged white line of a broken bone in the dark. We are looking for the music. And according to the C4 reality, the music is everywhere.